Growing up, I was raised in a very volatile home, and my childhood was rather confusing. Both of my parents are narcissists, and when you're raised with narcissists or narcissism, it's hard to recognize what that is because it is normal, right? That was my version of normal. So it was a very long time for me to, I don't even want to say wake up. I think I've had multiple awakenings in different aspects for myself, but the most difficult decision I ever made that truly changed my life was cutting off my parents.
Alrighty, Chris Wasko. Is it Wasko or Wasko? I wanted to make sure I got it
Wasko.
right. Wasko.
You
Chris,
Wasko,
I
correct.
got it right. Chris Wasko. So I was telling you before we started recording that you are one of those intuitives that does a little bit of everything. You're a medium, right? You're a psychic medium. You're an intuitive. You're an energy healer. I saw that you do feng shui in addition to that. But then you also have this work healing narcissistic abuse. You have something called Spicy Old Souls, which we're going to get into. I mean, am I missing anything? That feels like a lot just with that.
That that's probably it for now, but I swear things are always seemingly coming. Like, oh wait, yeah, I guess I could do that too.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like that's kind of how it is for intuitive, spiritual people,
Yeah.
people in the woo, whatever we want, whatever term we're using this week for what all of this is.
Yep.
But the thing that I really want to know for you, because you are so tapped in, was it always like this? Like when you were a kid, were you this spiritual and this tapped in? What was childhood like for you?
I was definitely not tapped in. I would have probably called myself an intuitive empath if I
Yeah.
were to connect with a label,
Yeah.
which I don't love, but
Yeah.
we're in a world of labels. So for all intents and
Exactly.
purposes,
Yeah.
that's probably would fit. But
Yeah.
no, I wasn't very spiritual. I was raised Catholic, so
Hmm.
it was a very religious upbringing, going to church every Sunday, and
Yeah.
fulfilling my sacraments and everything that entailed. So as far as just spirituality, that this wasn't something that was in my
Hmm.
home growing up, or I definitely believe the women in my family are highly intuitive, but a lot of them are not very connected or even aware of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I hear that a lot from folks that either because of the religious upbringing that they're in or the cultural, understanding that they're in, intuitive gifts or intuitive just thinking or feeling isn't really appreciated and it might be even actively suppressed. Is that what you were seeing with the women in your family?
Probably. I mean, it would have been looked upon as evil, and or
Yeah.
even just dismissed that some of it
Yeah.
is not exactly real. A lot of people in my family want to see it to believe it.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
obviously doesn't vibe with what spirituality is.
Yeah. So what caused the shift for you? Was there a certain point in your life where you decided to delve into it more? Did you continue with the Catholic stuff? Did you leave that aside? Like what did that look like for you?
So growing up, I was raised in a very volatile home, and
Mhm.
my childhood was rather confusing. Both of my parents are narcissists, and when you're raised with narcissists or narcissism, it's hard to recognize what that is because it is normal, right? That was my
Yeah.
version of normal.
Yeah.
So it was a very long time for me to, I don't even want to say wake up. I think I've had multiple awakenings in different aspects for myself, but the
Yeah.
most difficult decision I ever made that truly changed my life was cutting off my parents. I
Yeah.
finally said, enough, I'm not doing this anymore. A lot of it was to protect my own children, my own family. And at first it was absolutely terrifying because
Mhm.
I didn't know what was going to happen. When you have the type of parents I do, it can put you in a position of just feeling scared. And I
Mhm.
was scared. What's going to happen? What are they going to try and do?
Yeah.
Especially my mother, who can be extremely vindictive. And I just was taking baby steps at the time. The first thing I did was I sought out therapy for myself.
Yeah.
And it turns out my therapist happened to be a very spiritual person. So no coincidence there.
Yeah.
And I don't even believe in coincidences anymore, quite honestly.
Synchronicities, right?
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
But it just led me on this healing journey. And in that so many things had changed. My diet changed. I had had a thyroid condition, which I've since healed. I had so many things going on with my nervous system that not having to deal with my parents anymore had been healing. I probably are still healing, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And with all this healing that almost just happened just based off of this one decision, just to no, I'm not doing this anymore. I was healing so many elements. And then I started to open up more spiritually, where I started seeing people in spirit. I started
Yeah.
hearing people in spirit, and I had no idea what was going on. It was kind of exciting and confusing at the same time. So it really was an amazing part of my journey.
Yeah.
But really, it came to that one big decision for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely want to get into more of, what that, how those gifts manifested fully. But I just want to pause for a second because, you talk about growing up in a household with narcissistic parents. And I would love if maybe you could kind of give folks a description of narcissistic abuse, or just what kind of things to look for in case they might be thinking that they may have dealt with it in the past, or that they're dealing with it now.
Absolutely. I think one of the most important things to recognize is narcissism is a spectrum,
Yeah.
and that is not often highlighted. Usually, narcissism is defined as the grandiose, overt narcissist because it's very
Hmm.
common and that's a little easier to see.
Sure.
But you also have your covert narcissists, and that goes along the lines of things like the silent treatment, manipulation,
Mm-mm.
elements of putting you down to make you feel bad about yourself
Yeah.
in a very subtle manner. Whereas the overt narcissist is the one that's going to yell at you, abuse you in a very outlandish way, possibly even physical,
Yeah.
sexual, all of these things can be
Mhm.
encompassed in that. So it's first recognizing the spectrum and then seeing, okay, where are these people in my lives fitting on the spectrum? But
Mhm.
then, and this is the part that is usually the toughest, to be a little self reflective and recognize if you have been raised in a narcissistic household, you are
Yeah.
going to have tendencies yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's usually the toughest pill to swallow, because when you've especially been in an environment where you have really struggled with abuse, to recognize, oh my gosh, do I have these abusive elements that I might use on others? And the answer
Mhm.
to that is yes. And most often it is seen when that person becomes a parent, because
Yeah.
narcissism is a generational pattern
Yeah.
and we carry it on. And we may not carry it on the same way, but it is carried on in one way, shape, or form.
That's a really big point that you're making that I don't think I've heard a lot of people speak to. I think years ago I heard somebody call it fleas or something like that. I can't remember the term, but essentially, yeah, you're taking on a lot of those characteristics. Um, I mean, there's so many places I want to go with this. I mean, when you got to this point where you decided that you needed to go no contact, which it sounds like that was what the decision was, go no contact. Can you talk a little bit about just that period in time? I know you talked a little bit about, this how spiritual things started to open up and there was healing, but what other work did you have to do on yourself during that time? Because that's a huge decision to say, I'm never going to speak to these people again.
Mhm. Uh, a lot of it was what I was working through in therapy. At first,
Yeah.
I was going to my therapist weekly.
Yeah.
She specializes in EMDR, and we worked on
Yes.
that and working through some very traumatic events that happened in my childhood, very
Yeah.
violent events that happened in my childhood. So that really helped calm down elements of my nervous system. And I'm an avid reader, so I found myself finding a lot of books that I connected to, and
Yeah.
just things that really helped me along my healing journey. One of those things
Yeah.
was medical medium, because
Mhm.
of my thyroid, and I felt that I could heal it, and I just knew I just needed the right tools. And for
Yeah.
me, medical medium provided the tools, and that, as I said earlier, I've since healed my thyroid
Yeah.
and so many things. But ultimately, I healed my nervous system. I'm a calmer
Yeah.
person. I'm more peaceful.
Yeah.
Life is just better and it's easier. And I'm so
Yeah.
grateful for that.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, plus one to the nervous system. I think that that is the root of so much, in spiritually, but also just physically. It is like the super highway in our body.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about your spiritual gifts opening up because I know you said it so casually that, oh yeah, I started, seeing people in spirit and hearing people in spirit, but that's a huge transition to not having that. Did you start freaking out when you started having these mediumship experiences?
Surprisingly, no. I think more people around me were aware of my gifts than I was,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I would have people mention things of, my being very psychic and my being able to predict things. And
Yeah.
obviously in hindsight, as I look back at certain events and things that had happened, I recognize, okay, that those were my gifts. But because they were very quiet at the time, I wouldn't have called them gifts. Like I said, I just would have said, oh, it was just me being intuitive.
Yeah.
So the first thing that really started happening was my maternal grandfather, whom I had never met in life,
Hmm.
started communicating with me
Yeah.
clairaudiently. I would hear him, and I would also feel him, like, so clairsentient as well.
Yeah.
And because I had never met him, it was, I always find it easier to communicate with a spirit if you didn't know them in life, because if you knew them
Hmm.
in life, we kind of get in our head
Yeah.
what we're thinking. Is that a memory? Is that what our belief? But when you don't know them, it's just, you just have to go
Yeah.
with what spirit says. So as long as you're open to receive the messages, you're going to get them clearly. And
Yeah.
a lot of people had told me growing up how this grandfather of mine was so much like my dad. And
Mm.
I recognized that wasn't the case. I'm like, this, I could understand why some people might have said that, because
Yeah.
he has a bit of an intensity to him, like my dad. But he is an emotional person. Like as he was expressing things, and because I don't have a relationship with my mother, I couldn't really validate. So I was asking my sister, like, I think grandpa's showing up, because she's 8 years older than me. So she actually
Hmm.
did know him, even though she was young. And she's like, this actually really sounds like him, and was kind of mind blown. And then I
Yeah.
also verified with one of my uncles, because this was his father. And he was also like, oh my, yes, that's my dad. Absolutely. And how do
Yeah.
you know this? So that was just, to me, fascinating and exciting. And I just felt grateful. Here I thought I lost my family, and
Yeah.
I had family in spirit coming to me and giving me love. And it was just
Yeah.
exactly what I needed at the time.
Yeah, yeah, that's my favorite thing about mediumship. When I started, practicing as a medium and going to development circles, that was a thing that blew my mind that I was like, "Oh, this is real. Like you can
Yeah.
actually communicate
Mhm.
with those crossed over." And the reason why I love having mediums on the show is there are people, a lot of skeptics, even in the spiritual community that don't think that mediumship is possible. And I always try to tell folks it manifests differently than what you
Yes.
see on TV or in a movie. There's very few people, at least to my knowledge, that see somebody fully walking in the room. Like for me, it's, kind of flashes of clairvoyant, pictures in my head, or like
Yeah.
clairsentient, sometimes a little
Yeah.
bit clairaudient. It sounds like for you, it's more clairaudient and clairsentient. But can you maybe describe for folks who are a little bit more skeptical, what that might feel like for them? Because I do think, this is my opinion, that everybody can do this on a certain level.
I agree with you fully. And I
Yeah.
will say too, I am a full supporter in a healthy dose of skepticism. I am a natural
Yes. Yes.
skeptic.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it's really when we get to that place of cynicism where,
Yeah.
that person's just going to be very closed, and they're always going to have a
Yeah.
reason or an excuse. And so really, healthy dose of skepticism, because unfortunately there are people out there trying to take advantage.
Oh,
It's
yes.
also why most of my services don't revolve around mediumship, because I like
Yes.
working with the living a lot and helping,
Yes.
in that regard.
Yeah.
But it's really trusting yourself and connecting to yourself, and going within and recognizing that a lot of the gifts you've had your whole life. They
Yeah.
just, like me, might have been dormant because of trauma. And that's usually what I see, because so many of my clients, as they have been healing, they're recognizing their gifts. Their gifts are coming
Hmm.
to the surface.
Yeah.
It's not that they just suddenly have them, they're just
Yeah.
becoming more aware of them. So if, let's just say, you have very vivid dreams, you're
Hmm.
very likely a clairvoyant, and that's
Yeah.
how your gifts come. If
Yeah.
you are very strong in terms of getting gut feelings, then you are very likely a clairsentient. So it's really,
Yeah.
again, just things that have already been happening for you. And as you are on a healing journey, and I pretty much think we all are,
Yes.
you things will evolve for you as you want them to. Some people do not want to do it. I mean, at first I was a little freaked out because I was like, I don't know what I'm going to see. So I
Yes.
actually blocked my clairvoyance for a while. Do not show me things if this is going to scare me, and then
Yeah.
obviously I worked through that. But at first I was like, no.
Yeah. Yeah, I love spiritual boundaries. I'm glad you brought that up because I've talked to folks that, have been tormented. They said, oh, I keep waking up at 3 a.m. I keep getting, and I always say, you can set the boundary that you're
Yes.
not open for business. You
Yep.
don't want to talk. Before I go to bed, I'll tell, my, angels, guides, I say, unless something's going on in the house, unless there's an emergency, I'm not available until 5:30 a.m.
Yes.
Like you can
Yes.
set those boundaries. So, I always think that's just a funny anecdote to share. So, you mentioned some of the clients that you work with, and you mentioned trauma. So it sounds like if you'll, kind of be okay with me kind of making a leap here, that it sounds like you're kind of helping a lot of people who've gone through things similar to what you went through.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
That was almost accidental, I think,
Yeah.
or just serendipitous. It's just how life has worked out. But
Yeah.
when I had started where I wasn't doing this professionally, what was happening is I'm a mother. And so I would be on play dates with other moms and their children.
Yeah.
And it's very common for moms, especially with younger children, to just talk about things that we're frustrated about, we're going through, we're
Yep.
experiencing, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
when moms would start complaining about one of their children, I found myself hearing the child's inner thoughts. And
Yeah.
so the mom would say something, and I would be like, that's actually not what's going on here. So if I felt
Hmm.
comfortable enough to share, I would. And like, that's actually, may I share with you this? And, these were obviously women that were kind of aware of what I was going through and
Yeah.
awakening. And I would share, and they'd be like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that. And then I would ask questions that were validating, like, oh, are you noticing, he's doing this and that? And they'd be like, yes,
Hmm.
absolutely. I'm like, okay, well, here's why.
Yeah.
So I started helping children, and I realized I was helping kids like me. Like, what if my
Hmm.
parents could have understood my inner thinking? What if they knew that all their assumptions about me were in fact wrong? They saw me as a problem and a challenge when really they
Yeah.
just didn't understand. So that was really the kind of what tipped this. But so I where I started working a lot with children, I'm more are working with adults now. Like I'd say the age range is around like late 20s to late 40s is my
Yeah.
client base.
Yeah. And is it so? Let's talk a little bit about the narcissistic abuse thing because I did see that on your website. How are you able to help people work through narcissistic abuse from the spiritual perspective? Because you mentioned therapy, and I definitely, agree with that. I always recommend folks go there first, but then there's the spiritual healing that needs to happen as well, and the emotional and the nervous system. Can you talk a little bit about just what that looks like in your practice?
Yes, 100%. And I love how you said, just being an advocate for therapy, it is such a great first step. And I
Yeah.
often find with me, a lot of people will come to me because they feel that either therapy is no more longer working or they've just
Sure.
shifted in their journey. And I love that that's such a great first step because
Hmm.
it is their first step to being heard. And
Yeah.
then as far as me, because I can read energy so well, I
Hmm.
essentially will scan the body and kind of feel where I'm feeling stuff.
Yeah.
Because my primary clair is clairsentient, so I'm always
Yeah.
feeling stuff. And so when I'm scanning, I'll feel stuff in my own chakras where
Hmm.
I'm attached to my client. So I'll feel something, like let's just say, for example, I've got a feeling in my throat chakra. So I know
Hmm.
that something's going on with their throat chakra. So they were either, the stifled,
Hmm.
criticized for speaking too much. There's something
Yeah.
going on that has disrupted the energy of that chakra.
Yeah.
If I'm feeling something in my sacral or my solar plexus, there's something going on with the gut. And there is trauma there because we had so many emotions in our gut, don't we?
Hmm.
That
Hmm.
just really says a lot. So that's kind of the first layer because energy has layers.
Yes.
So I'll get that first layer, and then I always tend to hear clairaudiently where that came from. So I'll probably hear mom, dad, those are common ones.
Hmm.
I'll hear abuse, I'll hear trauma, and then that's like that secondary layer, and then it's going in further. So, you know, in order to save time in sessions, I won't necessarily get into all of it psychically, but just for example, I'll say to a client, all right, so I'm understanding I have something going on in the throat chakra. I'm
Hmm.
being drawn to dad. Can you tell me a little bit about your relationship with your father? And then
Yeah.
usually it's like tears
Hmm.
or
Yeah.
something comes out.
Yeah.
And, you know, and then it's working through healing elements for them. And I help give practices. I always do a write up after a session of here are things you can work on. And
Yeah.
healing is always a journey and a choice. I have clients that will absolutely do every single thing that I suggest because it's always coming out as suggestions and
Sure.
recommendations. Never you have to do this. I don't believe in that for anyone's journey. It's always a choice. And
Yeah.
uh, there, but the ones that do it diligently are the ones that definitely progress faster, and they're the ones that tend to open up to spirit pretty quickly.
Yeah. So, you talked about, and I love this, giving suggestions. I know some people call it homework or, whatever word we
Yep.
want to throw. So you give
Yep.
kind of, suggestions. Now, is there ever an issue if that person, for some reason, still has to be in contact with the narcissist that they dealt with? For instance, they still live in the household or they're in a co-parent situation. Are you still able to kind of work through healing in those situations?
Yes, yes. And I do, because in some cases, and co parenting is a common one, as well
Yeah.
as just
Yeah.
still living with a narcissist. And in a lot of cases, there's just elements of fear of people
Yeah.
feeling too scared to make change. So some of the changes they're really working on are the little changes within themselves. So, how can
Hmm.
they work on healing their own energy? You know, even in my case where I went no contact, I don't think that
Hmm.
that is the right answer for everybody. In some
Sure.
cases, I think it's very necessary, and in other cases, it's not. It's not a one size fits all diagnosis, if you will. And the
Mhm.
more you can understand just where your energy is at and taking those little steps to heal will help
Mhm.
you in aspects of like creating boundaries, because a lot of the boundaries that we talk about, especially with narcissism, if you're
Mhm.
dealing with an overt narcissist, some of those boundaries might be actually dangerous and put yourself in a situation that you might not want to be in. So
Sure.
I don't agree with the fact that people are so quick to say you have to set boundaries, you have to put out
Mhm.
boundaries, because if you are dealing with an overt narcissist that it might actually hurt you because you've set some
Mm.
boundaries, then your path is going to look a little different, and your healing journey
Sure.
is going to be different than somebody else's. So it is definitely a working with the individual of what can help them with where they're at right now, and then
Yeah.
looking at their long-term goals as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, as you were saying that, for some reason, my mind went to this conversation that I saw online about the other side of this, about people who are the abusers, people who are narcissists. And there's some people who believe that narcissists can heal, that they can get to a point where they're no longer abusing others. And then there's some people that say there is no change. It is not possible for narcissists to heal and develop. I know it sounds like in your work that you're dealing more with those who've dealt with the abuse, but do you have an opinion or a viewpoint on, can narcissists heal?
That is such a good question, and
Yeah.
I think it is possible,
Yeah.
but I also believe it is rare,
Yeah.
because one of the things that anyone with any kind of narcissism within them has to face is themselves. So the ability to be self-reflective is one of the first steps, and so many narcissists are not able to do that.
Hmm.
They're very quick to blame others, play the victim. Uh, it, they themselves are wounded. Anyone
Yeah.
who is a narcissist or deals with a narcissist or has fleas, is the narcissistic term. If you've just caught them being in the environment, there are elements of a wound within that you need to work on healing, and not everybody wants to do that. So I think it's a
Hmm.
matter of being able to take the steps. And uh, I can even say with my own siblings, I have two siblings, and uh, neither of them are taking the steps, and they're definitely carrying it on with their own children. And I saw it, I don't really have a relationship with them anymore, but I was like, I've already done act one of this. I'm not sticking around for act two. And,
Yeah.
but for myself, I know that every time I hear myself sounding like one of my parents, that's a reminder of an element of narcissism I need to work on within myself so that I'm not passing that on in my children. And
Yeah.
it's not easy. It's definitely a challenge. It's reworking so many things of your thought patterns, of what you think is okay. Because one thing, especially as a parent, and a parent that has been raised by narcissists themselves, is we tend to lock onto something in our minds that we're not going to repeat, right? So, like for me, I swore I would not hit my children. I
Yeah.
was hit so much in my childhood, and I didn't feel that that served me at all. So I swore I wouldn't do that. And what I didn't realize is there's so many other elements I still needed to work on. But we tend to get hyper focused on that one thing. And we swear we're not going to be like our parents because we don't do our one thing. And although we can succeed in the one, we have to recognize there's more to that. It's not just that one thing that we tend to get so hyper focused on, but it is an important one.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that goes back to what you're saying about the layers of healing, that it's easy to do
Exactly.
that first layer, that first, immediate thing on the surface, and then you keep peeling back, the onion, and you
Yeah.
realize, oh, there's more things that we need to work on.
Yes. So
But
true.
I wanted to make sure we talk about spicy old souls. That has been on my mind this entire time. I saw that phrase and I was like, I just need to ask her what that means. I want to know if I'm a spicy old soul. I need to know everything about this.
I love that. Well, my work is primarily with old souls. I
Yeah.
realized I was working with old souls even when I wasn't quite realizing it. And then when it was earlier in my work, I realized if there is an old soul, there's a
Yeah.
narcissist nearby. And if
Yeah.
there's a narcissist, there's an old soul nearby. So, a lot of people talk about, oh, if there's an empath, there's a narcissist. But what I was recognizing in my own work, I was like, they're not empaths, they're old souls. Because what about the old souls that are not empaths and they're with
Right.
narcissists or have
Yeah.
experience with narcissists? So, as I was evolving in this journey and in my own work, I was recognizing that a lot of things about old souls, I was just being guided to have information beyond what we're being told already. And uh, does that mean I'm meant to be at the forefront of this? I don't know. I'm just trusting the journey, and that's my journey. So when it came to spicy old souls, it was me developing this archetype system to help old souls on their healing journey because they can scale their spicy level of where are they at, and not only just in a general basis. It could be done on a daily basis, a weekly basis. Where's my spice level at today? Because think of like creating a dish and add the kind of spices you add or don't add. We do this as souls with our soul contract. So I really wanted to bring that to people because old souls often like to heal themselves and like to not to say they don't take help along the way. They certainly do, but for the most part they like having the tools and doing it for themselves on the journey. So this the spicy old souls is to help be a tool and a guiding system.
I love that. So it sounds like old souls kind of have a different way of operating, a different way of healing than someone who might be a newer soul who's here for the first time or one of their kind of first incarnations. Is it easy for you to kind of tell when you're looking at somebody of like, okay, they're a newer soul or they've been here a few times?
Not always at first,
Yeah.
especially because I deal so much with narcissism.
Yeah.
Because narcissists, as anyone who has experience with narcissism knows that they wear a mask, and that
Yeah.
mask can hide a lot.
Sure.
I would consider myself an expert energy reader, but when they have
Yeah.
that mask on, I'll get like kind of like that little inkling, something's not right, and it'll take some time for the mask to shift, and I'm like, there you are.
Yeah.
That's so in that it might not always give me that same feel on a soul age. And old souls have a lot of generals to them, like they tend to be the black sheep of the family.
Yep.
They tend to have had very difficult childhoods. They tend to feel like they don't want to be on this planet at times. So there's a lot of heavy elements to an old soul that a younger soul doesn't quite carry. Younger souls tend to be a little more lighter, freer in ways. But, and there's always a caveat, right? It's spiritual. So there's always that like, but then there's this more, right? A more evolved old soul will have a lighter energy because they've dumped a lot of that heavy weight along the way. So a more evolved old soul will just have different kinds of energies and feelings to them.
Yeah. So it sounds like it's very complex, and it's about kind of what you came in with, but also how you're dealing with it, how you're healing, and how you're choosing to evolve, hopefully.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. So I take it you're a spicy old soul then.
Oh, yes. Yes. And I would even consider myself pretty spicy. And a lot of why it took me so long to come up with a term, because I wanted to find something that really fit. And then when you're working to trademark something, you have to make sure that doesn't already exist. Yeah. And what I like about Spicy Old Souls is the acronym is SOS, because old souls need help. And this is a system that can help them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as we're winding down here, I want to make sure we have the opportunity to really dive into just all the ways that you like to work with people. I know you gave a lot of little tidbits here, but maybe something else that you could provide for folks is like, if they're at the beginning of their healing journey, what's your recommendation to them? If they're just like, I just figured out that I've dealt with narcissistic abuse, or I just figured out that I need to do some healing, where do you suggest they even start?
I suggest start with reading, right? They see where they feel they fit in that, where they feel the narcissist in their life fits, because they're going to start to understand things that seem normal to them or not quite normal or okay or acceptable. Yeah. And I feel like that's a really good first start, because it can feel so unsettling in the beginning. And I think big changes are not to be expected in the beginning. So those baby steps you could take for yourself, just, start reading. If you're not seeing a therapist, certainly something I recommend is, see if you can find a therapist, especially one that specializes in narcissism. If you do not find someone that specializes in narcissism, they are not going to understand. They need to understand what that spectrum is. And they'll likely have had experiences with it themselves and can understand your journey and what you've gone through. That was extremely important to me, and recognizing that it's trauma, and you are now starting to work through trauma and heal from that. So that's certainly what I would start with.
Wonderful. And Chris, if folks want to get in contact with you, learn about Spicy Old Souls, get a reading, start spiritual counseling, how can they get in contact with you?
That is on my website at my name, www.chriswasko.com. And I'm also active on social media, so you can find me on Instagram or Facebook at Chris Wasko Medium. So that's kind of easy to find. And I appreciate that.
Awesome. Well, Chris, I feel like I learned so much today about just what it means to be an old soul, about narcissistic abuse recovery. I really just commend you for digging into probably some of the hardest work, I think, in just the healing space. So thank you for doing that. I really appreciate it.
Well, I really appreciate you. And thank you for having me on and letting me talk about this, and creating this environment for this, because I know a lot of people need to hear about this stuff. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Highly Spiritual Person podcast. I really hope you found this conversation inspiring and uplifting. If you did, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel for more updates. And remember, sharing is caring, so if you think others would benefit from this content, don't hesitate to share it with your friends and family. We'll be back with more exciting content, so stay tuned and stay curious.